Hello, everyone. I'm Frank Garza with Lean Startup Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. Today's topic is how to build a community-centered product, and moderating the discussion is our own Lean Startup Company faculty member, Elliot Susel. Our guest is co-founder and CEO of Unsplash, Mikael Cho. And with that, I'll hand things off to Elliot.
Hello, viewers, and welcome to this week's webinar. Today, we're going to be chatting with Mikael Cho, founder and CEO of company Unsplash. We'll be exploring his journey and the topic of building a product centered around community. Mikael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Elliot.
Our goal today is to level up your knowledge, and by the end of this session, we'll hopefully have shifted your thinking around what it takes to build a product centered around community. Our agenda is as follows. We're going to start by learning about your company's origin story and your background. Every entrepreneur that we've chatted with has had a lot of interesting and diverse experiences, and we're eager to hear yours. From there, we'll transition pretty naturally into our main topic, building community-centered products. And then we'll wrap up with a summary and some closing thoughts.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Okay. So, with all that said, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, did you just like wake up one day and it was like a jolt of lightning? There's this thing I need to go do. What led you to the point where you got started on the Unsplash journey?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it did kind of happen, but the end is after a while of years of things that you experience. My background started, actually I was working at a design agency. That was like my first taste of the internet. I noticed all these like problems that were happening and trying to get creative work done. But I realized the power of it if you could kind of get through that. Like if you can get through making something, the power of the internet is like, if you make something, you can just do so much more than you ever could before. So that's what really attracted me to it. And then working out the kinks and finding all these things. And one of the things that always kept happening was like this stuff around using photos and media and these sorts of things. And originally I dealt with it more so on like being a project manager, working with a client. I'd find a photo and it would be like $500, and we didn't really even know. It's like, if 500 people see it, if 1,000 people see it, it's this. And like, how would you ever know that? And then by the time you get to the licenses, you're so confused. You're like, it's commercial use only, this thing only, with this size only, watermark on here, this. And it was just super, super, super confusing. So that wasn't when we started Unsplash right after that. That just kind of like was a seed in the back of my brain.
Yeah, well, I can tell you,
yeah,
even as someone who's putting together presentations and presenting at conferences, right? You like find an image and it's like, wait a minute, can I use that?
Yeah.
Right, there's this thing that perfectly illustrates what I need, but can I use it?
Right.
So
there's always that question. And it was a question the more and more that I made stuff. So, as we started building sites, as we started making emails, and then I was going into our first company. So Unsplash was actually like a happy accident. We had been doing the first version of our website for our actual company. And we're like, this is a really crappy process, again, trying to find photos. So we went and shot our own. We hired a photographer. We had all these leftovers. And we're like, we've now figured out a lot of what's wrong in this experience. And I bet, what if we just created the total opposite of everything that existed and made the ideal experience for someone who wanted to use photos? And we could use our own photos that we had done through this photo shoot. So we could control that and we could make a whole new type of thing. We knew all the problems. We were like, let's make it high res. Let's remove the licenses. We'll just throw these up. And originally we were going to throw it up on a blog. We said we could go just one step further. Maybe this would become something a little bit bigger than that. It could drive in some referral traffic to our original company if we do a bit bigger than a blog post. So that was how it ended up on Unsplash. But that all happened, that decision and the actual execution of it happened in one afternoon, in 3 hours.
3 hours.
So we got the photos. We took the one for the homepage. And I remember the Skype conference. There wasn't even Slack, didn't even exist yet at this time. And we were like, hey, this would be really cool if we could take these and do this thing. And I remember going on even the lean domain search at the time to try to find a name. Unsplash existed for $9. We had a Tumblr theme for $19. So the whole thing was put together in 3 hours with that amount of money. Public Dropbox links, hooked up to a MailChimp newsletter and a Google Doc sign up form.
Now, I want to take a moment to call attention to the fact that for those of you who are working in a big company, this sounds like an impossibility, right? To make a series of decisions, which cost less than $30, right? You would have had to go through so many layers of approval. You would have gone through so many decision makers, right? Like, you can never get this kind of progress. So I think it's interesting that you were able to, in an afternoon, sort of bootstrap this thing at a very low cost. You put it together. Now, I mean, did you have a vision for what it would become, or were you just sort of looking to share what you had done in a way that was different than you'd seen done before?
Yeah, we roughly knew that, and even these constraints, that you just mentioned in a big company, even though we were small, we also had constraints. There's only 4 of us, and we're running out of money, and my focus is like, I'm a CEO. Should I even be making this thing? So we were dealing with a bunch of like different. I know there are different constraints to what a big company would deal with, but there's always that thought, and that constraint ended up being, I think, one of the biggest strengths of it, right? Because you constrained the time so much. You're like, I need to be super efficient with this and figure out how to do these sorts of things. Now, yeah, when we laid out the plan, there wasn't even a plan. I didn't write down and say that we were going to use these things. It was almost like the Martian movie, where you just solve the problem, then you solve the next problem, and you solve the next problem. And if you solve enough problems, you get to go home.
Huh.
And that really like stuck with me. I watched that movie, and it related back to that original like problem solving. We knew what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to take images that were really nice and make them free and give them away. That was the core. But like how to do that in the most efficient way, that just was like a series of those little problem solving things. I'm not a developer, so that was also another constraint. So it was like I needed to like plumb together a few things that would make this work, and all of those things kind of come together into this magical start of something where you didn't put these expectations too high. So almost anything, I was like expecting 100 people, like 100 designers who maybe like this thing, and that's cool. Like, we could all contribute a few photos here and there, and maybe build this up over time. That's what we originally thought.
Yeah. Well, I want to inject here that what I'm sort of hearing harkens me back to a mantra that I really enjoy, which is to make reversible decisions quickly.
Right.
And in a similar vein, make inconsequential decisions quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So you can spend a lot of time doing this, but again, like for the low price, you just boom, 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 decide, get it done, and launched.
Right.
Okay. So continue on. I think you were headed. You had somewhere in mind for where you were headed with that.
Oh yeah. So I mean, the expectation, you keep that low. That's even great, because anything that happens from it will exceed that expectation. Like there's almost a guarantee that, and when it really exceeds that expectation, the whole thing feels magical. And that's what happened. So we were actually so embarrassed by the thing. I was like, I'm not even going to share this with anybody. It's super bad. Maybe like 5 designers that I know I'll share it with. And then I'm like, I'll just put it on Hacker News, actually, because Hacker News, we had never had any success. I was like, no, whatever. I'd rather have just people like shit on it, and let's see what happens. And then I went away from my computer. I got a text like an hour later from the photographer that we had shot those photos with, because I gave him credit on all the photos. And he was like, where'd you put that site? Because like my personal portfolio is just blowing up right now. And like I knew I only put it one place. So I was like, went back to Hacker News, and yeah, it was number 1. So it was number 1. And then I checked the logs. I'm like, what does Hacker News number 1 do? I saw the Google signup forms. That's the day that I realized Google Spreadsheets at the time had a maximum of 20,000 rows, because I could see the emails that were signing up in real time, and we were hitting the maximum number of rows that you could have in Google Sheets. So, and that fuels, got to solve that problem, move it over to something, a different signup form. But yeah, that was an exciting feeling coming from something that you didn't expect to ever sort of deliver that sort of thing, but you kept the expectation low. So there was a high chance that you would feel some sort of success.
Yeah. Well, this to me actually keys into 2 ideas. The first is that it sounds like the style of test that you put together or experiment that you put together in lean startup parlance would be a piecemeal experiment,
Right. Yes.
where you didn't custom code a bunch of stuff. You just sort of stitched together a couple things and put that forward.
Right.
And the other thing that this calls my attention to, and I can't remember the company that had this experience, but you didn't set out to create a photo sharing company,
Right.
right? You were in a design firm,
Yeah.
or company, right? And I believe it was Flickr that originally made an online game that had a photo sharing component.
Yeah.
And the online game didn't work, but people like sharing photos. So they just zoomed in on that and ran with that instead. So it is interesting to hear that perhaps your journey was similar, where you weren't intending to make a photo sharing service.
Right.
And yet that seemed to really pick up, and it picked up in a really profound way and in a way that you could measure.
Right.
Which I think is also really interesting. Okay, so you make this initial version, you post it on Hacker News, it blows up.
Yep.
Now what?
And this is no connection. So I'm not like that hacker, like a Hacker News person who has, I've been through Y Combinator. I have all these things. I know like people can do well on Hacker News. So for anyone who's listening, I had nothing. Like there was nobody I knew. So this was like a purely real, like organic thing that went number one.
Yeah. And look, like those problems you identified earlier, it sounds like there were a lot of people going, yes, that is a problem I have. Please, like, you have a solution. I want to explore that with you.
Right. Yeah. And we really focused. It wasn't, we were going to even provide the photos as long as we needed to. So the logic, like when we were thinking through that, I knew like it's really challenging to get any sort of like marketplace, let's call it, where there's two people coming together. It's really hard to get that sort of thing going. And with photos, ultimately was like, let's do high quality that we can remove the license completely. And how could we get that? And we thought the easiest way would probably just be us. And that led to another decision. So if it's only going to be us, how many could we realistically deliver? So we're like, we could probably do 10 if we needed to. And that's where the tagline came from, which the original tagline was 10 photos every 10 days.
Huh.
And I just threw up a submit a photo link there just to see, like if people want to really contribute, but there's really no reason why. There's no like stats. There's nothing of that would exist on the site at all. It was really just if you wanted to help build this thing. And we didn't put any copy up there that said, if you want to help build this thing. It was just literally submit a photo. So
submit a photo.
Your bare minimum of what you could put out. And within that first week, I thought that we were going to have to go out and shoot 10 more photos. That would have been totally fine. But then people submitted. People were submitting. And now that brings a whole new element to it. This is even bigger than just like a repository of our own things. People are using them and they're contributing to it. Now this gets really interesting.
So now you could have said, well, that was a fun thing to do, and I'm just going to sort of do this on the side and get back to my main business, for which you were saying you're the CEO, right?
Yes.
You got to make money. Yes. But instead, you decided to focus on this thing that makes no money at all, right? But seemed to be really resonating.
Yeah, so that didn't happen for a while. So what we did, the original purpose of Unsplash, yes, was to make something super just useful, but it was meant to be something useful for our customers of our core business. So our core business was, it was connecting high quality designers and developers with people who needed work done and short-term high quality projects. So we were connecting them. The site was called Crew. And so photography, everyone was needing it on both sides. So we knew it was probably a useful tool for everybody. And then what ended up happening is Unsplash did become the #1 referral source for Crew by far. And that was for 2.5 years. And it actually led us to our funding, for Crew. So what we did is we kept Unsplash running, but at that bare minimum, because we knew it's always, you have something that's working really well, and then you're sort of like want to invest more, but you don't know where's that 80-20, right? Like if I put 10 times more effort, am I going to get 10 times more of the people coming through? And that was pretty uncertain with Unsplash. So we really more just left it within that first year because it was doing so well and it was just growing organically every 10 days. We just kept growing and growing. So that was the only work that we did on it for the first like 18 months, was literally just me and maybe one of my co-founders going in there and checking the photos, putting the 10 in the email newsletter and sending it out. That was it. And it kept referring and referring and referring. So it was only until we were like, okay, this is getting really big now. You know, there's something, this is bigger than the core business in terms of the usage and what's happening. That's where the decisions had to be made, because we had only raised enough capital for one business. So we had to make a choice. And that's where the decision eventually came from. Crew would be in a better position to be acquired as part of another company where that could move forward in the way that we wanted to build it. Like big, you know, they're bigger projects, so it takes time, and we're building a lot of software. And Unsplash already kind of found its legs, and the mechanics inside of it needed a lot of the expertise from like that our team already had. So that was the decision to sell Crew. We sold Crew to Dribble, the online design portfolio company, and then continued on with Unsplash.
Okay. And so as you're starting to explore this, like this sounds like kind of a rosy picture in a lot of ways, right? Like everything is going right.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, did you encounter something that didn't work the way that you were expected, or was like a hiccup on the journey?
I think, the first time, like moving Unsplash off of the like hacked together tools, you know, and putting it on its own custom thing so we could do more custom things to it, you know, in the future. We first experimented with like outsourcing that, you know, that wasn't exactly how we wanted it to go, because it wasn't core, right? It was like, we weren't sure if it was going to be the core business ever. Like it was just this side thing that we were trying to slightly improve. And then we knew, you know, if we want this to be something meaningful, we're going to have to do it. So I think that was probably one. And then the second was, you know, we got copied by everybody. You know, like, as soon as the thing started taking off, we saw 9 photos every 9 days, 8 photos every 8, 7 every 7, you know, all the way down. And so in a way, I think it was great that it was protected. It was incubated in a way, like it wasn't forced to like really grow super, super fast. We got to keep the 10 photos every 10 days, which kept the bar really high for photography. But there were some other people who were like, saw that, and they were able to kind of like steal it and then move forward faster because we had this part of another thing. But now that we focused on Unsplash, we've been able to make a lot of ground there. But so those are probably two of the things that, I recall were more of the hiccups that we encountered.
So as you focus in on Unsplash, it was apparent to me in looking at the product that it's very much become a community-centered product.
Yeah.
Right? Talk to me a little bit about how that evolved.
Yeah. So, I mean, Unsplash doesn't exist if the photos aren't there, right? Like we can build amazing technology, but it would literally just be a blank page. You know? And what makes it happen is all the photography. So the community is just as much a part of that as any code that we can write on the site. And that's really how we think about anything that we're building into the site. So when you're submitting photos, it's not just like a throwaway thing. We're really thinking about what is the optimal way to help you like submit that so that it gets tagged properly and then gets put in so it's searchable, and so we can bring as much viewership to your photography as possible. We know that there's a lot of people who just contribute to this just because, you know, but there's not fully everybody is that way. Some people are contributing also because this helps them bring awareness to something else they're doing. So in a way, like Unsplash, that's what it did for our business, Crew. You know, it was the same thing. We made this thing that was useful, and it brought awareness to our business. So a lot of people who contribute photos, it's almost like they're mini Unsplash, right? They're making a profile and sharing photography and bringing awareness to something else that they have. So we look a lot at those sort of systems and how we can create more opportunities for the contributors who are essentially giving this without expecting anything in return. I think that is still the core thesis. I think we want a site where that is happening because we're all benefiting, right? Everybody is benefiting and then everybody's contributing. And I think that's the unique thing that we have really going on. Like the people who use the photos, often they're starting there and then they go and contribute photos, And so everybody's kind of got this, like, everyone's around it, doing something where they're contributing to it, using the photos, they feel that they want to give back to it. So that's a really, really great dynamic. And that's a lot of what we really try to focus on inside of the product.
So a question that's been sort of formulating in the back of my mind is around profitability.
Yeah.
Right. So what I haven't heard yet is how you make money or how you sustain the business.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a part of the plan yet, and maybe it doesn't need to be. But talk to me a little bit about your thinking in that realm.
Yeah, so we do want to make an enduring business. That's not just built on investment. So, like, we have investment, but that investment is not the business model. That investment is designed to help us find the right, enduring, long-term business model. But in a way, Unsplash, so much of the steps that we needed to do, we knew we needed to get as many people, like, seeing photos as possible. So the unique thing about us is because we have that license, an image is, like, fully portable. It doesn't just exist on Unsplash. It gets put into all these other products. It gets used everywhere. So we really need to build that infrastructure, because that's where we think the best sort of monetization opportunities can come from for everyone in the ecosystem. And the way that looks for us, and we're still experimenting and looking at a lot of these things, but if we can monetize on that distribution, right? So imagine you're able to take photos, post them up on Unsplash, they get spread all over the place. And then let's say a brand, you had a backpack in that photo and they're a partner of Unsplash, and they're like, oh, we want that to distribute even further. We're going to vote that up and make it be sponsored inside of certain things. And then we'll do, like, a split. So that's a lot of the things that we're thinking about still, but it's still really, really early. But we're super excited. Like, we've done some early pilots around things and similar philosophy. It's like day one almost, for this, and it's another layer on top of the Unsplash, like, community growth business.
Well, and to your point, in this idea of being in the early stages, from what I was seeing on your website, it sounds like you're experiencing this, like, mythical, magical hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
Right. Where I believe at one point I saw that your activity or number of users or one of those sorts of stats was doubling every 3 months.
Yeah.
But am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah. So,
I mean, that's the dream.
The library is doubling every 3 months. We're growing very, very fast. The core site is growing, and we have partnerships inside of other products where Unsplash is put in, like, Medium, Trello, Product Hunt. We're inside of those ones for people to make directly within those sorts of products. So that just, like, accelerates all of the growth that's happening. And we've made a lot of, like, focused things that we build on the product in order to do that. So our whole thing is, if we can push the impact of photography further than anybody else has, then it unlocks all these other opportunities that nobody else has ever even considered.
Got it.
That is the whole point and that's why there's a step to it. So the first step is push the photo as far as you can, 10 times further than anybody else ever has, because that opens up opportunities that would never work if you didn't have that 10 times, distribution. It might be too small. It might not make sense for the whole ecosystem, whatever it is. So that's how we're sequencing it.
Got it. And I guess a part of what's going on there is that, like, look, we don't know what the opportunities are because this hasn't been done.
Right.
And as we get there, and as we're learning, maybe we'll uncover what those next things are.
Yeah. And we're seeing behaviors. So it's the same. We have a lot of things that are happening on the site. Our contributors are getting hired for certain things. These things are happening naturally. And so there's ways that we can really grease those wheels. We know the behaviors are there, and we can create those opportunities. If you look at any place where people have ever posted, like, stories, whether it's written, visual, whatever it is, if you get enough people there, opportunities start to happen as those people mix together. So what we can do is build platform things that accelerate those opportunities.
So one thing that I'm starting to think about is it would be interesting to explore the ways in which you do your learning.
Right.
So you've got the product. How is it that you're learning which things are resonating, which things are going to take you to that next level that you're describing of new opportunities? How do you actually learn that stuff? Because I think looking at data, I would guess is a piece of the puzzle there. But I'd be curious to hear how you're going about that learning.
Yeah, I think there's a range of inputs that you need to look at. So I wouldn't say we let data just make us decide what to do. It's something that we have inputs into decision making. But the other key parts of that decision making is basic, like human psychology and philosophy. So I think that's one major layer. So understanding why people naturally do what they do. And then you kind of bring that into the context of photography and Unsplash and what people want to be doing, that sort of thing. And then you sort of just look at, there's general strategy. So there's business strategy, there's distribution, and watching out for like what's happening and how best to do something and how best to put something in order. So I would say those are like the two high level things that come in as high level inputs. And then you've got sort of your intuition that has been built up over making something like Unsplash. And then you use that, we really use that same style when we're like rolling out anything new. If we look at how we're looking at some of the monetization projects, we've gotten really far along. We're generating revenue and we don't even have landing page. Like, we started that by emailing. It started as an email, and like really ugly, whatever, here's what we're thinking, with some friendly people. Through that, we learned what to sort of put in a document. That became a deck. And eventually, it's going to become a page. But now, by the time you get to that page, you've already done like 30 versions,
Yeah.
So this is like a really tight pitch and you're not like really guessing at it. So now the next loop on it is the thing that you're developing value is the look of it. And that often that gets moved way up, right? That's like too many steps way too early.
Oh yeah.
And it starts with the words. So that we start, all of our stuff is like just really ugly with words. That's how most of our things start.
That's really interesting. I was talking with a startup the other day that had very much taken the opposite approach, right? Where they went in and they said, all right, we're kind of going to build this whole product. We're really quite confident that it's going to fulfill this really big need. And I was concerned because like, gosh, I hope it works. And if it is going to work, like, shouldn't that be something where you could prove it really rapidly and really easily with some conversations with customers? And so it sounds like you are taking that approach of starting with the least amount you would need to present to a customer to then have a conversation to learn about what is actually meaningful, valuable, and would work.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you have intuition that can bring you really far in those steps. And then when you just start guessing after that, that's, I think, the signal, right? That's like, okay, I've limited my intuition. It's kind of like at this point. And now is when it needs to hit something. It needs to hit another person who I think sees value in it. So I can hear what they say and understand some of these things. And then I get another loop on that. And it's no knock against, I think there's always this thing of intuition versus data. Like, how do you build your intuition? Your intuition is literally just a whole bunch of data that gets put into you over time. You're like learning all these things and you have like a complex algorithm that's running in your head. So actually they're kind of like the same thing, and it's just something that you kind of honed. And you hone it and hone it and hone it as you do more and you make more and you do these sorts of things and you see how people react.
Yeah. What I've seen go poorly in that regard is when someone starts doing that initial honing very, very frequently, right? They're very frequently talking to customers, but then as the company scales, they talk less and less to customers. They move more and more into like a management sort of position.
Yeah.
And the thing that's really tragic about that is that now they're even more distanced from the customer and much more in the realm of using their intuition to call shots.
Right.
And they're spending the least amount of time training their intuition to do that.
Right.
Right? And so they've become completely distanced. And while once they could call the shots in that way, they've lost their ability to do so because they're no longer talking with customers.
Right.
So I am really glad to hear that is working well for you as a strategy. And it's always interesting to hear the sort of minimum viable approach that folks take. And from what I'm hearing, and keep me honest, minimum viable for you is like the least amount you need to write down on a piece of paper to talk meaningfully with a potential buyer or customer about it.
I think you could start any idea pretty much, apart from building maybe rockets. You could start and rockets and autonomous cars without writing a line of code.
Yeah, right.
I think most ideas there's enough stuff that you can put together to get a first version to something. Everything we've done, we've done it in that sort of way, and I just can't see another path that's more efficient to doing that same sort of creation.
I would agree with you, and the reason, tying back to the lean startup methodology for a moment, right? There's this idea of the build, measure, learn loop, and the faster we can get through that loop to learn something, the faster we can arrive at a solution that actually works.
Right.
You could spend a bunch of time getting through the loop once, and maybe the fidelity of that learning is higher, but that only is relevant if you were in the right ballpark, right? If you were in the right realm of area to hunt. And unfortunately, usually we're not so good at even being in the right ballpark. So getting that directional feedback early on is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why creating products that solve your own problems are often the best things, because you can loop through those things really fast because you're the customer. So you don't necessarily need to go and talk to everybody, because you know those sorts of things. And then yes, once you start feeling that you don't know anymore because the use case is maybe moving outside of your original, like this happened with Unsplash. My original use case changed, it was solved, and now Unsplash is being used by a whole bunch of other people. And I don't pretend to know exactly what they want, but what I know is like baseline what kind of humans want. And that's where I kind of keep my input. And then we've got other inputs coming from, the team or people who use these in these unique ways. And that fills in sort of the information. And so you're not just relying on this like pure random intuition from 4 years ago when the site was originally created kind of thing.
Yes. Well, I was so glad to hear you explain that evolution, because a lot of folks take the stance of, well, I'm the customer, so I know what we want. But like, look, you work at the company, you're no longer the customer. But for that first initial problem, you yourself had it, and there was a lot of insight to be gained. And I love how you explained that at some point you realized, wait a minute, I'm no longer the person with this problem. I need to go talk to the people that do have that problem.
Yeah.
So I like that explanation of.
And we still have we're fortunate that photos are used by designers and developers and writers, and we have all of those people in our company. So we're like really close to people who use, like everybody on our team uses the site regularly. I just think that's you see, I think most of the companies who continue to be great, like product companies over time, their company is usually running on the thing that they make.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay close to the problem.
Yeah.
Right. Stay close to the problem. Yeah. Lots of companies come to mind for that. One I know is like GitHub, for instance, right? Where it's a software development repository. And like, guess what? That product's made by software developers.
Right. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I like that comparison. I think that's good. So on the topic of talking to customers, I'd be curious to explore a little bit. When I was looking through the timeline of the evolution of your company on your website, which is a really cool way that you've portrayed that information.
Oh, thanks.
I love that timeline. I saw that at one point you were doing community events.
Yep.
Right.
Still doing them too.
Still doing community events. So
yeah,
talk to us a little bit about where this idea came from to say, hey, wait a minute, like this is currently, a place where you can, post photos in a digital space. What if we make this a gathering in a physical space? How did that idea come about? And how have you decided to continue to pursue it?
Yeah, I think that's another example of, rather than building code, you build kind of the version of that in real life. We could have built like a chat room where people share things and do all these things. We knew that people wanted to meet. Is like we just didn't have, and we still don't have much on unsplash.com for that action, that thing to do. So this was almost like the supplement to that. How could people do want to get in touch, the people who are like close to each other when they go to new cities, and people who take photography, they're often like adventuring. They're looking at something, they're doing something. And so it really fits with being connected with people like through walks in different cities and that sort of thing. So that was like the original idea behind it. And we did it in a very like lean way. Again, the first time was just led by us wherever we happen to be traveling. So like if we were going to New York for like a meeting with a partner, we would do an event, you know, at the same time. And same thing with San Francisco. And even on like my honeymoon, you know, like we would just do it. And I went on, my dad's from Korea, and we took our first trip. Like I'd never been there. It was my first trip back with him, and we're like, let's do one there. And so it was this crazy experience. Like Korea was actually our biggest one. You know, we had, within 2 days, we had filled out an entire upper floor of like a bar. And all these people actually thought my dad was the CEO because he was there. So that was this funny thing. But yeah, it was a crazy thing to see that much uptick in like Korea. We don't even have the site localized or anything. And then what we did, we knew the next step was we can't probably sustain, like we're not going to come back to Korea all the time. Right. But there's probably people here who might be interested in taking over now that they've seen it. And so then it built into sort of ambassadors who lead those. So if we look at the ones today, they're all members of the community who lead these events. And if we're there and we try to make it, certain ones we can get there. But now they can really run like as independent things. And it's this cool thing that like connects the community in a really interesting way, in a very like efficient way as well.
Got it. This is really interesting. So your learning started initially with running these things yourself.
Yeah.
Spectacular, right? And from there, you saw there was enough interest. Then, in fact, this cannot scale with our time and attention. So let's bring some ambassadors into play.
Yeah.
And have them do the organizing. I'm sort of curious, do you periodically check in with your ambassadors to try to learn from their experiences in putting on these events?
Yeah, we work really close with them. I mean, we don't look at it really as like work, and it's the ambassador doesn't look at it that way either. It's more like, I want to do this thing and I'm hosting it and I'm really interested in photography and meeting people, being a part of like Unsplash and what's going on. And we help as much as we can do as much as we can, like from a remote aspect. And then some people do want to take it over even further. And then we encourage that and then try to support, you know, everybody in what they're doing as well. Like we don't just support people who post on Unsplash. Like if you're a member, like if you go and make something and do something cool, we also support that. Like that's the type of community that we're building. You know, if someone makes something else, like a member of ours makes a book, you know, we're going to support that. You know, someone wants to host a photo walk, and it's, you know, it's anything that's sort of related to moving that creative spirit forward. That's something that we're going to get behind.
Now, I want to take a step back and sort of marvel at this for a moment, and I want to draw a comparison that I think is sort of interesting, right? With Wikipedia, there already were groups of people that were being paid lots of money to put together high-quality articles to pack into a book, the encyclopedia, right, that people were paying for. And then Wikipedia came along and said, hey, wait a minute, what if you just donate your time and create these articles for free? We won't compensate you at all. People did it. And so here you've got the same situation, right, where you've got these really high-quality photographs where normally people would, at least historically, the script had been like, I'm going to do this because I'm getting paid for it.
Right.
And now you've got this whole community of people that are just donating them.
Yeah. I mean, even if we go one step further back in that history, originally art was just another form of storytelling. So it wasn't about the money, right? And then art became about the money. And I think what has happened by putting these great cameras in everybody's phones, we've all become like those visual storytellers again. We're telling people things. We're just sharing them because we want to share that feeling. You know, we want to either share that feeling so that someone else can see it who couldn't be there. We maybe kind of want to relive it a little bit again. And Unsplash is doing that, but it has that secondary element to it too, where also if this photo is useful for someone to go and make another version off of it, of something totally new, I also want to help make that happen. And that's the mentality that a lot of people have. And I really want to keep that mentality, because that is the core purpose of the site. It's not about, I'm coming here, I want to be paid for this. That's not why we submitted photos. We submitted photos in the beginning trying to be useful. We wanted to make something that was useful for people. I believe if the more useful you are, the more everything that you want to have happen is going to happen.
So let's drill into that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk a little bit about the chicken and the egg problem.
Yeah.
Right. So the more useful it is, right, the more attention you'll get and all of that positive activity that you were just describing. But how much is enough to get started on something like that? And what I think is interesting is that, like, you were just doing 10 free photos.
Yeah.
And people were going nuts for that. Right. So if you're trying to build a community, like, is there some critical threshold that you need to be successful? Or what would you advise to someone who has an idea for a community-centered product that they want to go explore?
Yeah, I think starting at the highest level, there's so much stuff, right? So we're becoming expert filterers. And so we filter for the best, and the best needs to be 10 times better than whatever the current best thing is. So that, to me, that means you go and find only the best 5 of whatever you can find, very small number, and you start with that. And you only build around that, and you very only slowly sort of add into that. If I would try not to take any money, I would try not to build any code, just like understand what you're trying to create with that initial 5, 10, very small numbers. And I've seen that as like the best way of starting these things up, because then you have this quality element, which leads to brand. That's the long-term benefit that can happen from this. When people associate quality with your brand, that becomes like the greatest thing that you can have working for you over time. If you don't start with quality, it's very hard to go back yourself back into that once people have sort of this feeling about what your brand is. So it feeds into that. And that wasn't the original intent of Unsplash, but having just 10, it made it really easy to know that we could fulfill that promise, which builds trust, and other people could start contributing, and we wouldn't have to hit like this really high bar. And that's some of those things that happen when you take investment or you build code. You feel like you have to make up for all of the time and money that you put into something.
Well, I like this suggestion. I made a note here even of small and quality.
Yeah.
The starting point for the chicken and the egg challenge, which is that you've got to have some amount of content, but start small and start with really high quality.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting guidance because, carrying that example, if you had thousands of photos, but most of them were garbage as your starting point, you think this would have worked?
Right. I don't think so at all. It wouldn't look different. People would immediately be like, it's just another one of a free photo site. Like, photos are kind of meh.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been remarkable.
Right. And that ability to return to it, the 10 every 10, I can come back and get 10 more. That was a way I wanted to have that people kind of coming back and looking for what was something that they could use again and build that behavior.
This is so opposite of how a lot of people think about what you need to start as like your first version of a product, is that, often they think that they need to do some small unsatisfactory slice of the functionality. And they say like, here it is. Let's see if that works. And what you're saying is be exceptional,
right,
in a very, very narrow slice.
Yes.
Of what it is that you think you might ultimately want to do.
Right.
So
don't build like a car that's half falling apart. Build like the most bomb ass tricycle that anybody has ever seen.
I like that reference to that image that's floating around. On how to build a minimum viable product.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground today, and I very much appreciate your time through this conversation. And I think you brought up a lot of really interesting points. Is there anything else that you would want to share with Lean Startup viewers or with someone that is trying to build a community-centered product?
I think your last question was the total right question to leave on. I think that is my takeaway. I think it's just something that sits in my brain whenever we're creating something new. It's that quality and small, and it just feels so right. Like every time we do that again, that approach, and we have to make something new. And I can't just see changing that philosophy. And so to me, that would be the one that has just really stuck through everything.
There you go. Lean Startup viewers, start small, but be remarkable. Really enjoyed spending time chatting with you today. If people want to learn more about you or your product, where can they find you?
Twitter, we're pretty active there, so that's probably the best. I'm Twitter, which is my name, so Mikael Cho, and Twitter for Unsplash is Twitter Unsplash.
There you go. My name is Elliot Susel, and if you've got any questions for either of us, send them to Elliot, ELLIOT, at leanstartup.co. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again, viewers, next week. Take care, everybody.